Meanwhile, the world's biggest pharma companies are under pressure. They cannot be allowed to profit from the pandemic. They must share their patents, their knowledge and their know-how to fight the Wuhan virus. Treatments that work cannot be exclusive. Gilead seems to have realized that. This is an American company that makes remdesivir. It has now struck a deal with 5 pharmaceutical manufacturers around the world to mass produce remdesivir. It's a drug that was originally made for Ebola, but it's now being repurposed to treat coronavirus patients. Remdesivir has undergone trials in America. It's still early days. More testing is required to know for sure if the drug works or not, but experts say it shows promise. And the company, Gilead, has turned to 3 Indian companies to mass produce remdesivir. This is a non-exclusive contract, meaning these companies will not have to pay any royalty to Gilead, and they will be allowed to set the prices at which they sell this drug. So why did this American company pick 3 Indian companies for the task? Because India has the capacity and a stellar track record. India is called the pharmacy of the world, and this is not hyperbole. The world cannot fight this virus without India's help. The Indian pharma sector has the capacity to produce potential cures at low, affordable prices. In 1969, Indian pharmaceuticals had a 5% market share at home. 5% in India. Global companies controlled 95% of the Indian market. By 2020, Indian companies have managed to reverse this equation. Domestic players now have an 85% share of the Indian market, and it's a huge market. Plus, Indian companies supply to the biggest countries in the world. Indian pharma holds a 15% share in the world market, 1-5, and that is a leadership position. India contributes more than 20% by value to the global generics market, and by volume, India supplies more than 40% of America's drugs alone. The best drugs at some of the lowest prices with high capacity. This is the USP of the Indian pharma industry. Experts believe that the world will not be able to kill this virus without India's help.
Indian generic factories are, in a sense, the pharmacy of the world. They provide huge numbers of treatments for people with all kinds of diseases, including HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and the world relies on India for this mass production. So if India can make these drugs for these other diseases, they can do it for coronavirus as well, or at least I hope they can. I hope if we find a drug is effective, that the companies that are making these drugs for other diseases can start making more to treat coronavirus, but very quickly. And the demand, if a drug actually is shown to be effective, the demand is going to be just astronomical. And we're going to need factories to start mass producing the drugs very quickly, but also supplying them at a reasonable price so that anybody in any country can get the treatment they deserve.
And it's not just the treatments or the pills. Once we have a vaccine, the world will turn to India for supply. Remember this, more than 40 lakh people in the world have been infected by this virus. Many more will need a vaccine. Effectively the whole world, more than 7 billion people. Who is going to produce all these doses? India. India produces more than 60% of the world's vaccine. It accounts for 60 to 80% of the United Nations annual vaccine procurement. India is the best candidate to supply the coronavirus vaccine to the world whenever it's ready.
About 70% of the vaccines used around the world for extended immunization programs are made in India. I mean, almost every child in the world has received a vaccine made in India, and that's really important. It means that Indian companies put out 1 billion vaccines a year. And that's the kind of capacity that we're going to need in order to get this vaccine to the people who need it all over the world, not just people in the United States, not just people in Europe. I think one of the things that we may overlook or may be overlooking is, we know that India has great universities and a lot of very talented and intelligent people, a thriving biotech industry, and all of those people, all of those resources could be brought to bear on this, probably the greatest pandemic threat in the last 100 years.
India can leverage this. India's drug manufacturing capability is India's new soft power. There are three distinct areas of opportunity. One, pharmaceutical exports, of course. Two, India can position itself as a medical tourism destination, especially for the Western world that seems to be running short on critical drug supplies. And three, India can reach out to vulnerable nations, offer its knowledge and supplies. This is what makes you a global leader during a global crisis. Already, India is extending a helping hand in these areas. Indian drugs have been exported to more than 120 countries in the world. India co-sponsored a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly. It calls for a fair, transparent and equitable access to essential medical supplies and any future vaccines for the coronavirus. 179 countries have thrown their support behind this resolution. So India is ready to make a tangible contribution to the world in this pandemic. As the government tries to flatten the curve at home, it can unleash the true potential of India's medical diplomacy.